I have been part of the early contemplative morning prayer group on Tuesday mornings here at St. Paul's since nearly its inception. Before the pandemic, we gathered in person in the early dark of the chapel to say morning prayer together. Whether in the chapel or now on Zoom, we each appreciate the quiet time of prayer and the focus it gives to our day. Pre-pandemic, those of us who didn't need to rush off to work made a habit of going across the street afterward for tea, muffins, and much conversation. Often outside of the market, we would meet our friend Craig, a chronically homeless man whom we came to know. Always, we greeted him and stopped to chat for a bit. One Tuesday, 3 of us stood talking with him, and while the others continued to chat, I suddenly realized that I had half turned away from him, ready to move on, wanting to get out of the winter cold. I am sure that my posture was sending him the all too clear message that I wanted to head inside. When I caught myself, I immediately turned so that I was again fully facing him and gave my full attention to the conversation. A small thing, seemingly, a common encounter in the midst of an ordinary day, something any one of us might do. It could have been Craig or some other acquaintance, a family member, a coworker, or a friend. It could have been anyone that I too quickly turned away from to seek my own comfort, whether warmth and tea, or a task needing doing, or some other pull away from the moment and the person in front of me. As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus saw 2 brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Or put another way, "I will make you fishers of people," our modern inclusive translation of the phrase, replacing the one in the song many of us learned as children, "I will make you fishers of men." Last week in John's Gospel and this week in Matthew's, we hear of Jesus embarking on his ministry after his baptism in the Jordan by John. In Matthew, this comes after Jesus learns of John's being arrested by the authorities. Jesus then moves from the larger and more central Nazareth to the small town of Capernaum on the shore of Lake Galilee. He's moved farther away from the authorities and the self-important to dwell among the marginal, ordinary folk. Perhaps because it is safer away from the eyes of those who arrested John, but also, as we know, to follow his mission, to bring good news to the poor and the outcast, to bring light to those who walk in darkness, as Isaiah puts it, and as Matthew quotes specifically to make this point, to proclaim the good news of the kingdom and cure every disease and every sickness among the people. It is in Capernaum that Jesus calls his first disciples, Simon and Andrew, James and John. He said to each of them, "Follow me." And immediately, we're told, they left their nets, their boat, their father, and followed him. I don't know about you, but for too many years, this conjured up for me a picture just as we hear it in Matthew. In the midst of what they were doing, these new disciples left everything behind in that moment, their belongings, their work, their families, and never looked back. They physically walked away from all that was familiar and literally followed Jesus wherever he went. And yet, if we remember all those other stories of Jesus' encounters with the disciples, we know better. Jesus walking on the water out to the storm-tossed boat where Peter and the other apostles are still fishing. Jesus getting into a boat to get away from the crowds and going to the far shore. Or Jesus coming to Peter's house and curing his mother-in-law of a fever. and Jesus, after the resurrection, telling them to let down their nets after they have had a fruitless night of fishing while he is on the beach fixing breakfast. All those stories suggest that while, yes, the disciples did walk with Jesus as he went from place to place, teaching and healing, they also still had their own lives, their work as fishermen, their families, their houses, their possessions, their neighbors. They were called not so much to new work, though that was part of it, but to a new way of living their ordinary lives. They were called by Jesus to be fishers of people, and that implies relationship. Jesus, that is, calls us and these first disciples into relationship with himself, with each other, and with all the various people they will meet over the next few years, and indeed the rest of their lives. We so easily think of a calling or a vocation in its most narrow sense, and usually to some particular work, a doctor or a lawyer, something grand or prestigious. In religious terms, too often we think only of being called to ordained ministry or to the monastic or religious life as a call. Regardless, it is almost always in our understanding a call to do, and not necessarily to a way of being. And yet it is all about being in relationship. Jesus issues that same call to us, firstly to be in relationship with him, and then to be in genuine and real relationships with the people around us, and to be in those relationships the way Jesus was and is in relationship with his disciples and with us, bearing each other's burdens, caring for each other, and especially the vulnerable, holding on to each other through thick and thin, always with the hope and promise of God's abundant grace, and not with our feet turned in another direction. Sometimes that call to be in Christ-shaped relationship with others will take us far from home, and sometimes it will take shape in and among the persons right around us. But it will always involve persons, not simply a mission or a ministry or a movement, but actual flesh and blood persons. People like Craig, whom we meet on the street, and those who share our homes, our workplaces, our neighborhoods. People to whom we can offer our full attention in the here and now of every encounter, showing them that they are seen, reminding them that they are loved just as they are, which in itself is the proclaiming of the kingdom. This is the focus of our Spin ministry, the small group who go out Sunday afternoons to engage and meet the needs of our neighbors. But beyond that, we are called to engage, pay attention, and advocate for everyone who remains unseen in our communities. In the years since that encounter with Craig, I have participated, as have many of you, in a variety of rallies and marches. Just this past Monday, hundreds gathered and marched to mark Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Every gathering and walk has been to bring attention to the needs of often neglected or discriminated communities of people, whether women, LGBTQ folk, those of other than white ethnic groups, and other marginalized people. Always it has been about wanting to be sure that everyone from our neighbors to those in government and other positions of power understand our concerns. Our worries that they will not be paying attention to the very people who need us to be in supportive relationships. To all those who differ from them and from many of us economically, ethnically, religiously, for those in our inner cities or small rural areas, for those born here or who are seeking refuge, for all men, women, and children. For as we are all aware, known or unknown, near or distant, like us or not, we are all neighbors and share a common humanity. We are all ordinary people. And Jesus called ordinary people in the middle of their very ordinary lives to be in relationship with the ordinary people all around them, and through that did extraordinary things, and still does.